Good evening and welcome to The Right Side, the show where we talk about today's news, views, trends, and opinions from an admittedly conservative perspective. I'm your host, Chris Pareja, and this evening we're joined by Jonah Goldberg. He's a Fox News commentator, senior fellow at the National Review Institute. He is a syndicated columnist, gets into all things conservative. Jonah, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So which came first, the pen or the human bug light for you? I mean, give us some background. Help people who don't understand who you are to know a little bit about the path you took to being all of those things I just said about you.
Sure. Well, I mean, I grew up on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, where we were among the only politically conservative people around. We were sort of like Christians in ancient Rome. And
being fed to lions on a weekly basis.
It felt like that could be a possibility. And but I never really planned on getting into all of this stuff. I had a very, very intellectual father whose only hobbies were moving to the other side of the couch to read a different book or magazine, or going on long walks with his sons and explaining to him why Stalin was a bad guy and communism was awful. And so I grew up in all of this stuff, and I always wanted to be a writer, but I planned on writing science fiction and comic books, and I kind of fell over backwards into the punditry business. You know, like almost everything meaningful in your life, you sort of stumble into it by accident. And so, I mean, I was the editor of my college paper and all that stuff. And after college, I went off to Prague right after the Berlin Wall went down, and wanted to teach English. And I mean, I went there to be a starving writer. Sort of batted 500. I didn't starve and I didn't write. Right. But I taught a lot of English, and I had a good time, and went to a lot of casinos and made some questionable decisions. And when I came back, my girlfriend at the time was going to law school in Washington, and I was visiting her, and I went on this random interview at a place called the American Enterprise Institute, this think tank in Washington, and I landed this job as a research assistant to a syndicated columnist, and that sort of got me on this path. And I did a lot of freelance writing back then. My first published op-ed was in the Wall Street Journal in 1992, on Election Day of all things. And it's funny, normally back then they would get about 500 submissions a week, and very few would get in there. And I sort of lucked out where they took mine the first time I tried. Oh, this is easy. And the further rejections came later. And I did that for a while. And then the guy I was working for became a PBS television guy. And I moved over to the production company that he had hired. And I did documentaries and a weekly television show for PBS for a while. And I enjoyed it, you know. But I decided it wasn't for me because I enjoy being sort of the master of my own fate, artistically, not to get too shishy about it. And when you write, what ends up on the page is yours. You have ownership of it. And for me, doing television and writing in somebody else's voice, like my wife's a ghostwriter and a speechwriter. She can write for other people's voices. I can't do that. I have a sort of a distinctive voice. I write for myself, and I'm very lucky to be associated with National Review Magazine and the American Enterprise Institute, because they sort of let me be me.
Yeah. And so, was there an epiphany moment or something like that? I hear the progression, and you've obviously examined who do I want to be when I grow up, and oops, this isn't it.
Right.
What was the epiphany moment that kind of set you off into? Because you said you stumbled in, but usually there's a moment.
Well, no, for me it's not a moment. It's funny. I got this advice from my old boss, the guy who ran this television production company, when I was telling him, I don't think being a TV producer is for me anymore. And he told me this long story, which I'll truncate for our purposes, about how his mom was a painter. And she always gave this advice to people who want to be painters for a living. She said, you have to like smushing the paints. Forget what school it is, what you want to paint, impressionist or this or a realist that. If you don't just enjoy the smell of it, the feeling of the canvas, of that excitement you get when you sit down to do something, if you don't, you won't stick with it. And I enjoy writing. There are days I hate it, but over the long haul, it's really who I am. I could take or leave. Being on television helps in my line of work, but it's not it's not essential to who I am. And no offense to you, I'm sure you're a great and all-powerful and wonderful man, but there are a lot of people in Washington who get addicted to being, and New York, who get addicted to being, yeah, to be sure, in LA, who get addicted to being on TV. And there's some people you get the sense in Washington, I won't name names, who if they lost their television show, if they lost their TV gig, they would just dry up and blow away.
They lose their whole identity.
Yeah, because that's who they are, and that's never been who I am. And I'm not saying that to brag. It's just maybe if I were much better looking and I got better feedback, I get addicted to it. But being fairly homely helps in keeping you humble. So
homely and humble. I see what you did there. And now, but I've got this image stuck in my head of authors all snorting ink because they like the smell of the smushing of paint as a part of paint. So I'm sorry, I'm totally distracted.
You go with it, man. Oh. You're on your own vision quest. You do what you want to do with that.
And now I'm wondering if I should be snorting electronics or the cameras or
the smell of ozone just does something for you.
It does. Yeah. It does. No, so you talked about the TV helping in your industry. Is that what kind of led the progression toward television and the media and that flavor versus just because you've identified several different personalities? I mean, there's the producer type, the analytical who doesn't mind playing as a team and having everyone get the credit, which didn't feel like a complete fit. You like the ownership of authoring, but then the TV is a different personality because those are a couple of behind the scenes types of things in a way. And people don't normally make the transition from the back of the camera to the front or from the editing booth to the...
Yeah, but I mean, I fell over backwards into TV. I liked it because particularly, doing it for public television was a great opening, talking to girls. You must be a sensitive, nice guy. You work for public television, and I got to go to cool places with my light meter and look like this. And it was a cool thing to do in your 20s, but I always felt like writing was who I was. And it took me a long time to realize that writing for television wasn't who I was.
But speaking of television is, writing for it isn't.
Speaking of television is fine. I like it. I like giving, I give speeches. It's the performance side of it is fun, usually, although I've spoken to quite a few hostile audiences, which is less fun. If I had to pick an identity, it's as a writer, not as a performer.
And any specific media that particularly draws for you? I mean, the web versus print, or does it really matter? As long as you're writing.
It's funny, in internet years, I'm Methuselah. I've been doing this for a very long time, and I was the founding editor of National Review Online. I created the first sort of major group blog in 2002 or something like that, and I was one of the first political bloggers. And it's funny. It was it was probably around 2004, 2005, where it kind of flipped, where it used to be if you were an established writer, you only wanted to be in print.
Right.
And now, once you sort of, and I hate to talk in these terms, but once you sort of have a brand as a writer, you want to get your stuff out there as much as possible, so it matters more to be online. I always give the advice to young writers that if you're bringing clips for a job interview, it is much more impressive to bring stuff that has been published in print. Because if it's published in print, people in the business understand that there's just a finite amount of dead tree and ink that goes into print, and so they have to be more selective about what goes in there. If you bring something that's just been on a website, it doesn't really count for much. And it was weird. About 2004 was when authors who were submitting to National Review magazine, the storied William F. Buckley magazine, would also say, "I'll do it, but you got to run it on the website too." And it used to be like the website was secondary to the print, and now those things have really merged in a way. And the way of things is for eventually print's going to go away.
Right.
The reassuring thing to me is that people don't understand is that even though I love newspapers, I mean, talk about smelling the paints, I love just physical newspapers, the written word is still king. Television producers get all of their idea of news from what they read in newspapers and magazines. It's just the format of how they get it is changing, but writing is still important. In fact, this is the most exciting time probably in 100 years to go into journalism. The one downside, it's very hard to figure out how to get paid for it, and so young kids have a rough time with it.
Well, and that's an interesting perspective because there's so much doom and gloom associated with journalism. People are like, I can't make any money at it anymore, I don't want to do it, but you're calling it exciting, which is pretty counterintuitive.
Look, I mean, if you have an iPhone, there is more there's more communicative power in an iPhone than there was in a television crew 30 years ago. I mean, the things you can do, the platforms, the digital technology, the ability to switch from video, which I'm not a big fan of internet video, and if I can find the guy responsible for autoplay videos on news sites, I will beat him about the head and neck with a broken bottle. But
there are heavier devices.
Yeah, I know, but I just want to scar him up.
Scars are good.
And but one of the great things, look, everything's a double-edged sword. I'm a conservative, so I in this life, there are no utopian perfect goods. Everything has a downside. Every downside has an upside because we live in this world and not the next. But one of the great things that's come with this sort of media unraveling is that you no longer have to sort of have the joy ground out of you by covering city council meetings for 5 years and then moving up to City Hall and then moving up to the state capitol, and by the time you're in your 40s, you're just sort of burnt out. You can just jump right in. The downside of that is that a lot of the people who jump right in have no training, have no experience. All they care about is being famous or getting clicks, and they don't want to do any of the homework that is required to actually have a lasting career. So it's a mixed bag, but if you're good, if you're talented, it is easier to get noticed and rise today than it was 30 years ago.
And get paid through other mechanisms, maybe not directly from the authorship, but through other supporting mechanisms. So it's interesting. You've called yourself the C word a couple of times, conservative. Yeah. And at the same time, you've worked at PBS and CNN and grew up in Manhattan and things that are not normally, we talked about lion feedings, right?
Right.
But before the show, we were talking a little bit about this polarization that's happening. You're in the political space, and nothing polarizes people or says, hey, here's the third rail, stick your tongue out here, than mentioning the T word, and that would be Trump. We talked about how Trump is known in the media and that kind of thing. Give us a few of your perspectives on the things that he's doing, how the media is enabling him, both on the conservative and the liberal side.
Sure.
And how you think he's getting away with it?
Yeah, well, the thing is, it's not clear he's getting away with much. I mean, his poll numbers are worse than any first-year presidents and since polling was invented, right? And we can have an argument about how much polling matters and has everything changed. Fine, but by the metrics that he himself cares about, he's not doing great, right? But put that aside for a second. I think there are a lot of problems in this culture that Trump didn't create, but he's making worse. He's accelerating. I'm a fairly well-known in conservative circles Trump skeptic. I'm not part of the resistance. I think that's a really dumb way the left has done this, where they basically want to take the position that by definition everything he does is evil and wrong and stupid, right? My position is, as an opinion journalist, I think, I'll put it this way, about 90% of journalistic ethics is a lot of garbage, to justify professors at Columbia Journalism School. But one thing I truly believe in is it's your job as a writer and as a person not to lie, right? I mean, I'm not saying you can't tell someone those jeans don't make you look fat, but when it comes
that's life preserving right there,
that's
right?
But in my line of work, you will avoid being ashamed of yourself. You will avoid a lot of problems. You'll avoid the charge of being a hack if you just don't say things or write things that you don't believe to be true. And so I call Trump like I see it. Some of the things that he's done, I'm entirely in favor of. I think his judicial appointments, which he's basically outsourced to the Federalist Society, have been great. I don't think he really cares about judges. Remember during the campaign he wanted to put his sister on the Supreme Court. But he understands, as a matter of political tactics, that there are certain things he has to do. And one of them is he can't betray the base on judges. He can't betray the base on guns. There are a couple of those kinds of things. But beyond that, I think that Donald Trump has basically no ideological core whatsoever. I think he's broken the blood-brain barrier between entertainment culture and political culture. And in the long term, I think this is a bigger problem for liberalism than it is for conservatism, because if you haven't noticed, most of our celebrities stink. I mean, there's only so much you can do with, Ted Nugent, and Kid Rock and Scott Baio.
Right.
But, George Clooney and Tom Hanks and Oprah, who's apparently thinking about running for president, Now that they've seen Trump can do it, I don't see why they wouldn't think about it too. And I don't think that's good for our culture. And one of the reasons I don't think it's good for our culture is that politics isn't entertainment. When you start watching politics and government in Washington as if it's following some literary narrative, right? Oh, I hope my hero wins, right? Barack Obama benefited from this enormously as president, where the mainstream media covered him like he was a hero. Mm-hmm. And so even though he had said on, I think, 28 different occasions that he couldn't do DACA, right, because it was unconstitutional, he admitted openly, I do not have the power to do this under the Constitution. And then when he did it, the vast majority, the New York Times, the Washington Post, everybody, what a hero, because he's gotten what he wants. Well, that's not how our system is supposed to work. The way our system is supposed to work is, if it's unconstitutional, you can't do it.
Right.
But when you start, everyone wants to talk about how entertainment has been politicized, right? The Oscars, where they preen and brag about their bravery on the cheap, and they defy Donald Trump. And I have problems with all that. I've been writing about that stuff for 20 years. The stuff that people aren't paying attention to is that when you start politicizing our lifestyles, you're also making politics into a kind of, you're sort of lifestyleizing politics.
Right.
And people now are kind of wearing their politics on their sleeve, and they don't really care about public policy or the issues or the ideas. It is basically, I want my team to win and I want your team to lose.
Right.
And my understanding of conservatism was never about teams. It was about, is this the right position or is this the wrong position?
Right.
I wrote a book called Liberal Fascism, and it was widely misunderstood. But one of the key takeaways about it is that in the American political tradition, which is the one that's supposed to matter, that the hero of all our stories is the individual. The moral unit of our society is the sovereign individual, right? As Calvin Coolidge liked to say, one with the law on his side is a majority. And what we're seeing now, what we've seen on the left for a very long time, with all this talk about unity and, government is just another word for the things we do together and all that kind of nonsense, and lots of moral equivalent of war arguments, we're now seeing countered by the right with a lot of right-wing populism and nationalism. And my definition of conservatism, going back to the founding, is that the hero of our story isn't the mob. The hero of our story is the person who stands up to the mob.
Right.
And when everyone starts, during the primaries, when Trump was, or during the general election, or the primaries, when Trump was getting all his attention as a nationalist, and Bernie Sanders was getting all his attention as a socialist, well, as someone who's neither, kind of left me out of the conversation.
Right.
And it's not just because my last name's Goldberg that I have problems when nationalism and socialism are coming together in our politics, but it's concerning.
Yeah, that didn't end well last time.
No, and look, my basic view is cheer up, for the worst is yet to come.
Yeah. No, but when you do this and you have this team kind of mentality, and it's the us versus them, and you want your team to win at all costs, I think people also lose the long-term perspective of, hey, wait a minute, if our team wins this time and we smash the other team and we take the rights away that they don't have, if the team switches, we're screwed.
Right.
Because they can do it back to us. We don't think that way anymore. We just think, okay, I've got to win.
That's right. And what I want is buy-in for certain neutral rules for everybody. There's this great scene in A Man for All Seasons, one of the great political movies, and although it doesn't actually represent Thomas More in real life that well, but there's this great scene where Thomas More is talking, I think, to Richard Rich, and he says, so you would tear down the whole forest just to catch the devil? And Richard Rich says, absolutely would, because we catch the devil. And Thomas More says, well, I wouldn't, because our laws are like great mighty oaks that are planted in our culture, and when you clear them all away, it makes it that much easier the next time for the devil to sneak up on you. And I'm butchering the quote. But that's sort of the point, is that you want to have neutral rules for everybody that apply no matter who's in power.
Right.
And we are losing sight of that, both on the right and the left, where, and again, this problem way predates Trump. I remember how furious I was when George W. Bush signed McCain-Feingold, and he said, look, I think a lot of this might be unconstitutional, but we'll leave it to the court. That was the only impeachable thing George W. Bush ever did, because he openly and confessedly broke his oath to uphold the Constitution. And we now live in a country where we now think that something is constitutional if the Supreme Court says it, and it is not constitutional if the Supreme Court doesn't say it. And that's not how the system is supposed to work. It used to be that Congress used to be able to kill any legislation by just taking like a vote and say, do you think it's constitutional? And if it lost that vote, it was done. The rights and the ultimate responsibility for interpreting the Constitution resides in the people. But instead what we do is we sort of outsource this to these priests who have no, if particularly the liberal justices, if they think it's a living constitution and get to read it like it's some sort of weird religious idol rather than an actual piece of text, then we don't have a constitution anymore. We just simply have elections where we give power to one coalition or another coalition to tell us what the Constitution means this week.
Right.
And I don't think Donald Trump gives a rat's behind about the Constitution, but we've had a lot of presidents who don't care about the Constitution. Clearly, Barack Obama doesn't care about the Constitution either.
Right. And then they can rewrite and everything else. If it doesn't say what they think it should say, we've moved into a place.
In the penumbra, right? I mean, so this is, I guess, my point. When I complain about something Donald Trump has done, when Donald Trump does X, and people say, well, what about Obama when he did X? I have no problem calling out the people, like the New York Times hates stuff that when Trump does X, but they had no problem when Obama did it. I had a problem when Obama did it, and I'm going to stay consistent and have a problem when Trump does it.
Consistency.
And that drives a lot of people crazy because we live in this time where our team needs to win, right? And when you hear Donald Trump's rhetoric, never talked on the campaign trail unless it was prepared text and you had to, about liberty, about the Constitution, about freedom, about limited government. These are foreign concepts. His selling point was strength and will and power and winning, right? He promised you this utopian future where we literally won so much we begged him to stop winning, right? And that was keying into this frustration that's totally understandable on the right, that we were losing a lot, that we felt our country's being taken away from us, and that's a legitimate fear. But I'm not willing to throw away the Constitution. I'm not willing to throw away the things I believe simply so a team with an R on its name, on its jerseys, wins more. I think that the whole point of conservatism is to stand for something a little more important than a partisan food fight.
Right. And so we've got about a minute left. Is there a solution? I mean, for this problem of people being more concerned about their team versus...
Sure. In a minute, I think the single most important solution is to push as much of politics down to the most local level possible. Give people the power and the responsibility over their lives that they actually see politics as something that affects them. When it's all going on in Washington and nothing's getting done and it's dysfunctional, that encourages people to see it like a TV show and they just want their team to win on Sunday rather than lose. If politics actually has power at the local level, you give people the control and the meaning in their lives to take ownership of their lives. And that's the way the system was originally set up, and that's the way it should be.
So get them off the couch and into the game.
Exactly.
Perfect. And what's the best way for people to track your current thinking? A website?
You can go to just nationalreview.com. I'll have my own website up soon. Or my Twitter handle is Jonah NRO it's at Jonah NRO at Twitter. So.
Okay, perfect. Well, Jonah, if you'll hold on for just a moment, we'll be back after a word from our underwriters, the Conservative Forum.
Some people think that a meeting of conservatives in Silicon Valley could fit in a small room. In fact, when the Conservative Forum was founded in 2003, we did meet in a small room, a coffee shop in San Jose. It doesn't get more grassroots than this. It may surprise you that there are thousands of people right here in Silicon Valley who share your principles of liberty, free markets, and limited government. Since our humble beginnings in that coffee shop, we've outgrown 3 meeting halls. From San Jose to Gilroy to Mill Valley, we bring hundreds of people together each month from all over the Bay Area to promote the principles of American liberty. How do we do it? It starts with a stellar lineup of speakers. Speakers like Steve Forbes, Senator Jim DeMint, Dr. Victor Davis Hanson, Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, Andrew Breitbart, Pamela Geller, and many others. These speakers passionately articulate our shared principles and remind us why conservatism isn't just the smart choice, it's also the moral choice. Our monthly meetings are only one dimension of the forum. We underwrite The Right Side, a monthly television show on cable access channel KMVT. We also host a monthly Constitution discussion group and provide tables at our meetings for more than a dozen local groups who share our love of liberty to promote their specific cause. The Conservative Forum is the premier place in Silicon Valley for conservatives to gather, become invigorated, motivated, and empowered. We welcome guests to our monthly meetings and offer special discounted pricing to first-time visitors. Take a look at our speaker lineup in the coming months and join us to learn why we say liberty is made in America.
And welcome back to The Right Side. That was a word from our underwriters, the Conservative Forum. We appreciate them immensely because they've made this show possible for what is now coming up on the end of the end of the 6th season, and so that's greatly appreciated. But what they're really best known for is their speaker series, and that's the reason that we were able to have Jonah on the show this evening, and a lot of our guests that we hit way above our weight when interviewing with, because they do show up at the IFES Portuguese Hall at 432 Stearland Road in Mountain View, just a few minutes from here, once a month, usually the second Tuesday, and Jonah's going to be speaking there later this evening. But in November, Dana Allen, who's the CEO of American Uncensored News Network and has 7 broadcast stations here in Northern California, will be at the forum. In December, Andrew Klavan, author of such internationally best-selling crime novels as True Crime, which was filmed by Clint Eastwood, or Don't Say Word, filmed starring Michael Douglas, and Empire of Lies, will be there in January. Lance Izumi, he's the current senior fellow at the Koret Senior Fellow in Education Studies and the senior director of the Center for Education at the Pacific Research Institute, will be there, and we just have them coming and coming and coming, high-powered speakers from around the country and around the world. You can find out more at theconservativeforum.com. I don't know about you, but when this is all over said and done, I really enjoyed talking to Jonah this evening because he has a different perspective on things. So many times we have guests that will come in and talk about you need to restore the local power and take control back from the federal government. But Jonah actually, his perspectives and some of the things that I think concern us all with being able to look past just whose team is winning and looking at the longer term ramifications of some of the decisions we make as a culture, it hit home with me. And so I do encourage you to look him up, to learn more, and find places where you can throw darts at him, question his philosophy and his thinking, but also open the dialogue with him. I think you'll be greatly educated for it. This has been The Right Side. I've been your host, Chris Pareja, and I will continue to be Chris Pareja tomorrow. But we've enjoyed having you on the show. If you do want to reach out to us, though, throw flaming darts in our direction or ask questions, you can do that at therightsidetv@gmail.com. Otherwise, we'll see you in show or on the show or in person sometime soon. Thanks again, and have a great night.